You've stepped into History Bound, where we saddle up and ride straight into the past. No shortcuts, no whitewash, just the trail as it truly ran from the folks who walked it. You're listening to Ghost of the Rimrock, a short story novel written by Ricky and Sidney Phipps. All rights reserved. The wind smelled of dust and sun-baked earth, sharp as a whip across the low mesas. Bitter Creek wasn't much to look at. Wooden board sidewalks, a general store that looked like it had been patched with every plank in Texas, and the Blue Wing Saloon with its half-shuttered doors swinging slow in the afternoon breeze. I'd come for nothing more than a fresh cinch strap for the bay and a pound of arbuckles, and maybe a clean mug of coffee before the road got any hotter. I didn't come here often, but from time to time needed some supplies. Then back to the desert. I tied my horse, a rangy bay with eyes like burned leather, and let him graze while I adjusted the buckskin cinch. The townsfolk kept their heads down. Folks in towns like this always do when a stranger comes riding in with the look of a man who's seen more desert than garden. And although I had been in town a few times, I had to agree no one could look stranger than me. I've learned it's easier to watch from the porch than to meet a man like me on the street. The saloon door swung open with a groan, and I stepped inside. It smelled of sweat, spilled whiskey, and old wood that had soaked in 1,000 stories. The bar was busy enough to hum, but the eyes in the room caught me like a ripple through water. Most turned away quick. Some lingered a moment longer, and I just let them linger. Quiet's a kind of conversation out here. No one asks questions unless they've got a reason, and I've learned reasons get a man killed. I settled onto a stool at the far end, letting the bartender pour my coffee slow, black as midnight. I sipped, letting the steam curl around my face, listening to the shuffle of boots and low laughter. My hand rested lightly on the Colt on my hip, a habit one picks up out here. A man who's lived among the Apache learns to respect the weight of a gun as he respects the weight of a knife-edge ridge. Both can save you or kill you, depending on the measure of your judgment. My attention was drawn to a shadow on the other side of the room. Amongst all the other odors, I could smell danger. I knew I had someone's attention. Then he stepped out of the corner where he'd been watching. A young man. I knew the kind all too well. A boy with bloodlust-driven eyes and a holster that hadn't learned the feel of real iron. Billy Miller. Sheriff's boy, as I would soon learn, but at that moment just a kid looking to carve a name into the bark of the world.
"You Cates Remington, ain't you?"
he asked, voice high and a little shaky, yet sneering.
"They say you live with the Apache. Say you're faster than a greased—"
Then his eyes kind of looked confused for a second before he finished.
"Snake."
Now right then I chuckled to myself because I played with all kind of critters growing up in that Apache village that harbored me after my folks were killed by Mexicans. Me and them Apache boys entertained ourselves many a day by greasing up sidewinders and watching them try to crawl. No matter how hard they tried, they just wouldn't get no traction. Obviously, this boy didn't know. He stepped closer, hand hovering near the Colt that looked too heavy for his wrist.
"I don't think you're so much. I think you're just a man who's been lucky."
I turned slowly, letting my eyes meet his in the reflection of the mirror behind the bar. Luck or not, it's always made the difference between life and death. Luck runs out, son, I said, quiet. Go home. There's no glory in a pine box. But he wouldn't hearin'. He'd made up his mind. And a man who's made up his mind in Bitter Creek is usually already dead, or the one to kill. I barely had time to finish my coffee before the boy stepped fully out from the corner, boots scraping the floor like he was trying to drum up courage he didn't have. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for his age, and there was a twitch in his hand that made my gut tighten. He wasn't just a kid with a gun. He was a boy who had been told he was destined for the storybooks. And I've learned the kind of boys who chase legends often get themselves killed trying to catch them. "You hear me, Remington?" he said, voice louder now, shaking just enough to give him away. "I'm going to show this town you ain't all that. Fastest draw, huh? Well, I'm faster." I pushed my mug aside, requesting that the bartender fill it back up. "Boy, listen," I said slow, letting the syllables hang. "There ain't no glory in proving nothing. I'm not the fastest, not by a long shot. Up till now, I've just been good enough. I've never wanted a reputation, and I'm not asking for trouble. Leave that Colt in your holster before you do something you'll regret." His hand twitched again, this time closer to the grip. I could see the sweat darkening his collar, the way his fingers flexed, itching for the moment he could prove himself. I'd met that kind of fire before. I'd met it in the faces of men who thought killing me was their first step into the world. And I knew it would only take a heartbeat for that fire to burn him all the way to the ground. He moved, quick, jerky, a motion he'd practiced 100 times in front of a mirror. But mirrors don't shoot back. Nothing in practice can teach a man to calmly look down the barrel of another gun and make sure of your own shot. When reality is thrown into the recipe, the whole loaf loses its sweetness. It has a way of draining a man's nerve like pulling the cork out of a whiskey barrel. I was already moving before his gun could squeak the leather. The roar of my .44 cracked the room, echoed off the beams, and the boy went down. Not the way you see in the dime novels, not dramatic or flashy, just thump, a gasp, and the spurs jingling once on the floor. The room went silent, the way the world does when it notices someone just stepped over a line that can't be uncrossed. My heart was heavy, a young life needlessly gone. I always hate this part. I heard a sound, and turning my head, I saw a shocked Sheriff Eugene Miller standing at the door. Wide-brimmed hat shadowing his eyes, sun cutting along the badge pinned crooked on his chest. His hands didn't shake. His face didn't move much at first, but the heat in the room made him look like stone in the sun. He stared at the boy, then at me. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I was innocent. The choice had been made for me. His voice came, low, steady, and full of something dangerous you could smell before he said it. Kind of like the sulfur smell of shotgun powder, but in this case the smoke arrived before the buckshot. "Cates Remington," he said, "you bought yourself a lot of trouble. You've killed my son, Billy." I backed toward the side door, every step measured. Calmly and deliberately, I replied. "He drew on me. I tried talking him out of it. He thought he was going to make himself a name. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Again, I tried to talk him out of it, but he had his mind made up." Miller just stared. "Makes no difference. He was my son. I will hang you." I paused a moment before replying. "Listen to reason. I really didn't want to kill him, Sheriff. I just ain't good at dying either." My horse nickered from just outside, and I knew I could get in the saddle before the sheriff could cross the room. But how much distance I could get before someone decided to try their marksmanship was another matter altogether. I tell you, sure as the sun is hot, I was sweating, and I was in a lot of trouble. I'd never drawn a gun on a lawman before, and had no desire to. I could almost feel the noose tightening up on my neck standing there. It wasn't a pleasant thought. The bartender unintentionally gave me my chance. For the second time that day, nervous fingers saved my hide. He accidentally knocked the glass over on the bar top, catching the sheriff's attention for just a quick second. Taking advantage of that diversion, I dove out the side door, grabbing the reins of my horse, and swung up. That bay leaped out of there like Satan himself was behind us, and somehow I felt that it would have been easier if he was. Miller was going to be worse. I felt a sharp whip of a bullet as it grazed my side. I could hear the sheriff yelling orders. I didn't look back. No sense in it. I wasn't planning on staying back there. In front of me was where I was headed, just as fast and as far as I could go. My side was stinging like a hot bee sting. A bullet had come close, but I was making distance mighty fast, and the chances of getting hit now were slim. My hand came up with blood on it. The wound wasn't a bad one, but enough to remind me I wasn't invincible. Sheriff Miller didn't fire anymore. He didn't need to. 12 men would come after me by nightfall, maybe more by dawn. I knew how men like Miller thought, how they broke men down. Ruthless, smart. A man who could see every corner before the dust even kicked up. Folks feared him for a good reason. And now he'd be chasing me, driven by vengeance for the boy he'd never truly raised, for the son who wanted to be a man on the wrong side of the law. I kicked my horse hard and headed for the rim country to the east, where the canyons and washes would hide me if I rode with sense. Though it was a justifiable shooting, I knew Miller would have me dead to rights on paper. But the paper didn't matter in the desert. Out here, the land and the skill you carry weigh heavier than any badge. I pity him, for it's no small thing for a father to lose a son. It's even worse when it was for no reason or no honor. If a man meets an untimely end, it should be for doing something to better the world. Maybe not the whole world in general, but everyone lives in their own world.
All it takes is to do good for one person, and you've changed the whole world just by one deed. There is honor in that, but none in the pride-driven way that Billy Miller died. Well, here I was in the desert, but I had skill. Skill I had learned from living over 9 years with the Apache, through sweat and stone and fire. I'd outrun men, hidden in shadows, tracked water in places most men never knew existed. I'd survived worse wounds than the one gnawing at my side now. I'd do it again. I just didn't know if I'd make it far enough before the sun dipped or the first of the posse cut the horizon. Chapter 3. The sun was a cruel overseer, burning the horizon while the dust churned beneath my horse's hooves. I didn't look back. That was the first rule of running from men like Miller. Look back, and the wind carries their shadows straight into your path. I kept my eyes on the rim, on the washes and rocky ridges that might hide a man or a trap. The wound in my side throbbed with every motion, a steady drumbeat of pain that reminded me I was flesh and blood, not some ghost the Apache had raised. Another bullet had nicked me near the ribs, crossing the Brazos's edge. Just a graze, but it burned like fire every time I leaned forward on the saddle. I pressed my palm against it and gritted my teeth against the pain. No time to slow down, not now. Miller was proving himself to be a very smart man. From a high ridge, I sat my saddle and observed him splitting his posse into two. Split forces could circle from the high ground and flush me toward more traps. I had to be clever. Lucky only lasts so long. Skill and cunning had to carry the rest. My first trick was breaking my trail. Most men ride straight. Most men leave prints that tell a story. I rode backward through the soft sand for 50 yards, then cut sharply into a dry wash. My horse slipped once on a loose boulder, and I felt a shot of pain through my side, but we kept moving. I had learned the art of deception as a boy, playing hide and seek with boys in the village. A man's tracks can lie if he knows how to lay 'em and how to use the land. By late afternoon, I found a shallow tanaja hidden in the shade of a high bluff. Water sloshed in the basin, clear and cool. I drank slow, letting the grit slide off my tongue, filling my lungs with the smell of rock and mesquite. My horse drank too, careful, head low. I patted his neck and whispered, "We ain't out of this yet, boy. Not yet." That night, I rode in the gray hour, letting the shadows take me. The posse wasn't likely to ride in the dark, yet I stayed alert. A large group of men cannot easily travel without risking a loose horse or a broken leg. I found shelter in a narrow cleft between rocks, tied my bay tight, and sank against the stone. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from a distant homestead. The stars were sharp, cold pinpricks in the black sky. Pain flared as I shifted. The bullet scrape in my side had heated under the sun, turning every movement into a memory of the shot itself. I tore strips from my shirt, chewed on prickly pear pads, and packed the wound. It throbbed, it burned, but it stayed closed. Survival is mostly will, and mine was stronger than the pain. I thought of the boy, Billy Miller, and felt a tight knot in my chest. He'd wanted a story, a way to mark himself as a man. And he'd learned in the end that stories have teeth, that life takes more than it gives. I didn't dwell long. Miller's wrath was already in motion. 12 men, maybe more, all thinking I'd make a mistake stepping out of that saloon. But out of sheer luck and a good horse, I managed to get out of town with most of my hide. I rode until the desert became maze-like, the Malpai stretching in black shapes against the moon. My horse stumbled once over hidden rocks, nearly throwing me into the jagged stones below. I pressed down with my legs, whispering to the animal, "Easy now, easy." Every step sent a spike of fire across my ribs. I swallowed against it, steadying my breath, letting the pain be just another sound I'd have to live with. By dawn, I had gained the rim country. From above, the washes looked like veins running through the red stone, and I traced my path with the eye of a man who had learned to read the land as a map. My surrogate family had taught me this. Watch the gullies, the way water carves a hidden trail, the shadows under rocks where a man or a coyote could slip unseen. They had saved me more than once in my life, and now those lessons were all I had. I slept fitfully that day behind a crag, one eye open, feeling every vibration in the earth like the desert itself was speaking.
My horse grazed quietly, ears flicking at every sound. The wound ached, my muscles screamed, but I had one goal: put distance between me and Miller before he could circle, trap, and end the game. I was alone, hunted and bleeding, but the desert had a rhythm that matched my own, and I knew, somewhere ahead, the people who had raised me 9 years of my life were waiting. Whether the posse realized it or not, the desert had its own justice, unforgiving, unmerciful, and it always favored the patient and the cunning. Chapter 4. The desert is a cruel teacher, but it tells the truth. It doesn't flinch at weakness, and it doesn't forgive mistakes. By the third day on the run, I felt the weight of every bruise, every graze from the brush, every stone my horse had stumbled over. The wound along my ribs burned with a steady insistence, reminding me that every heartbeat could be the last if I got careless. Miller was clever. Anyone that could still be on my trail with the tricks I had devised was a force to be reckoned with, and had more going on behind his eyes than the average person. I continued to watch my back trail from hidden high places. The way his posse moved, even now, was strategic and determined. Not just muscle, but brain. He'd split the force early, sent scouts to the high ridges, flanked likely routes, and left men behind to shadow my trail. A man like that doesn't just chase, he anticipates. Every canyon, every wash, every outcropping was already in his calculations. I had to be quicker. I took to the roughest ground I could find, where my horse's hooves barely touched soil, and the prints disappeared in the cracks and broken stone. I doubled back, circled, and let the dust rise in confusing clouds, hoping the men behind me would read false signs. Twice I heard the faint echo of distant hoofbeats, and each time my pulse jumped. Each time I forced my breathing steady and pressed on. By mid-morning, the sun was a relentless hammer. I found a small cleft in the Rimrock and let my horse rest while I stripped off my shirt and treated the wound. The bullet nick had opened again, a sharp sting that drew a hiss from my lips. I packed it with chewed, prickly pear pads and bandaged it as best I could with the torn strips of canvas from my saddlebag. Pain kept me honest. It reminded me that a man has limits, even when his mind refuses to acknowledge them. I thought of the Lipan Apache, of Flaco Chavez, who once told me, "The desert gives nothing without cost. You pay in sweat and blood, or you die." I had learned to read the wind, to smell the water in a dry basin, to listen for the faint click of a scorpion or the scuffle of an unseen animal. Those senses kept me alive now. The first real close call came at a narrow wash where the rocks rose like red teeth on either side. I had barely dropped into the shadow of the cliff when the crack of a rifle rang out. The bullet thumped into the bank near my head, throwing dust in my face and the smell of hot lead in my nose. My horse jumped, throwing a shock through my side. Pain lanced up my ribs, white hot and biting, and I gritted my teeth to hold on to the saddle. I ducked lower, letting my horse hunch against the rock, ears pinned. Another shot whistled past, and I realized Miller had a man on the high ridge. He was waiting, calculating, testing me. A good shot, too. I didn't return fire, couldn't risk pinpointing my position too soon. Instead, I waited for the wind to shift and the shadows to lengthen. When it was right, I pushed the horse up the opposite side of the wash, riding blind in a tangle of rocks that would throw any man who wasn't able to keep his balance. Thankfully, I succeeded with much effort. By evening, I found a hidden basin with water and shade, a small miracle tucked under a ledge. I dismounted, slumped against a rock, and let the horse graze. My side throbbed with every breath, and I realized a fever was starting to climb. I pressed my hand against the wound again, the smell of infection hit in my nose, and muttered a quiet prayer to whatever spirits were listening. Miller was close. Too close. I could feel it in the air, in the way the coyotes were silent at night, and in the faint tracks that didn't belong to me. He was patient, but patient men make the deadliest hunters. And I knew I'd be seeing him again, before the chase ended. But I had my own secrets. The desert wasn't just land. It was a weapon. Every ridge, every hidden basin, every shadow of rock was a tool if you knew how to use it. I had learned a lot over the years, and had learned patience myself. Nothing in my life had come easy, and life had taken more from me than I cared to remember. Now, I was fighting to just keep that. If Miller wanted to take me, he'd have to understand the desert first, and he didn't know everything. Not yet. I laid my head against the horse's neck that night, letting the animal breathe warm and steady, and thought of the rim country ahead. Somewhere in those rocks and washes, my people waited. My brothers and sisters of the desert who had raised me when I had no one. And I knew, if it came to it, they would answer the call. But that was a hope I had to earn. Tonight, I survived. Tomorrow, I would ride again, and Miller would be waiting, every step of the way. Chapter 5. The morning was a furnace. The sun struck the desert, transforming the land into the gateway of hell, and every step my horse took sent jolts of pain up my ribs. The bullet nick in my side had worked loose again, burning like fire with each movement. I pressed my hand against it and whispered to the horse, "Steady now, steady." The land stretched ahead like a scar, reds and browns turning to gray where the rocks caught the first sun. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the shadow of the rim cover my path, every movement a negotiation with pain. I felt fever creeping along my spine, the way sickness rides in quiet at first, before it flares and takes hold. I knew then that I had no room for mistakes, not with Miller's men breathing down my aching back. I reached a narrow canyon and dropped into it, hoping the walls would hide me. The horse stumbled over loose stone, and I grunted, pressing closer to him to stay in the saddle. The thump of the bullet that grazed my side earlier still rang in my mind. My ribs ached, muscles screaming, but I kept moving. Pain was now clouding my mind. Every step was a fight to remain conscious. I had to go on. I had to reach safety. I would not die like this, an innocent man chased down like a dog by a group of vigilantes masquerading as the law. I still felt pity for Miller's loss, but I was about to get mad. Hot mad. The kind of mad that makes a man react first and clean up the mess after. He had been given his chance to see reason, but my restraint was stretched to its limits. If he didn't call an end to his charge, then I was about to take the war to him. I stopped briefly to drink from a hidden spring I'd spotted the night before. The water was alkaline and bitter, but cool. My hands shook as I sipped, and I pressed my palm to my wound again, feeling the warmth seep through. I let the horse, who was showing signs of fatigue itself, graze on whatever it could find. I listened for the faintest signs of pursuit. The wind carried nothing but the hiss of the sun and the occasional caw of a crow. But I knew Miller's men were out there, watching, calculating,
waiting for me to slip. I rested for a while, leaning against a rock, closing my eyes. Pain throbbed in my side and legs, exhaustion creeping over, threatening to take the most valuable thing that I still clung to, my consciousness. I thought once again about Flaco Chavez, who'd once told me that a warrior's spirit was measured in endurance, not just in speed or strength. Endurance, he had said. The desert tests all things. Let it test you, and it will teach you. I mounted again as the afternoon sun seemed to climb even higher. Okay, Flaco, I thought to myself. This is going to be one more test. Dust choked the air, and the tracks I left were nearly invisible in the broken ground. I changed direction, cutting sharply over a ridge, then slipping into a shallow wash, trying to throw off pursuit. Every creak of my saddle, every pebble skittering beneath my horse's hooves, sounded like a drumbeat counting down the seconds to some unseen end. And then I heard a shout, muffled but unmistakable. "There! He's heading that way!" My stomach tightened. They had picked up the trail again. Miller was clever. He'd left scouts where I least expected them, and now they were moving to trap me. I pressed my horse harder, ignoring the pain, leaning into the rhythm of the ride. Blood pounded in my side with each jolt, every step a reminder that I wasn't a ghost. Not yet. The next hour was a blur of dust, sweat, and rocks. I ducked behind a boulder when I heard rifles crack in the distance, the shots thudding into the sand near my horse's hooves. Each bullet that struck near us rattled through my chest, thumped against the ribs like a hammer on iron. The heat of the day made the desert shimmer, hiding and revealing in equal measure. I moved in the gray edges of shadow, letting the land guide me more than my eyes. By nightfall, I had gained some ground. My horse stumbled once more, and I felt a flare of pain in my side that nearly sent me off the saddle. I pressed him forward, muttering low, "We're not done yet, boy." The fever burned stronger now, and I realized I couldn't keep pushing forever. I needed shelter, water, rest. The desert doesn't forgive exhaustion, and I was getting close to the edge. I found a small overhang tucked beneath a ridge and collapsed beside it. My hand pressed to my wound, and I whispered a quiet promise. "We make it through tonight. We ride again tomorrow." The stars came out like cold pinpricks above, and I let my mind drift just long enough to remember home, to remember the people who had raised me, who had taught me how to survive when all else failed. Miller would be on me by dawn. I could feel it in the desert, in the silence between the wind and the rocks. But I had one advantage he didn't. I knew the land, I knew the desert, and I knew the patience of a man who had learned to wait for the right moment. Pain, blood, and sand, they were my companions now. But I was still breathing, and as long as I breathed, I'd be running. Chapter 6. The horizon was a smear of red and gold as the sun dragged itself across the sky, and I felt every ounce of my body beg for rest. The heat had baked my side, the fever pushing at my temples, and even the horse's slow shuffle seemed to grate against my ribs. I swore low to myself, grinding my teeth. Not today, boy. Not yet. The desert stretched ahead, jagged and endless, Rimrock rising like teeth in the distance. I kept to the shadows as best I could, slipping along the narrow washes, letting the dust cover my trail. Every step was a negotiation with the land. The broken stones chewed at the horse's hooves, and I balanced him with careful nudges, feeling the lurch and jolt of every stride deep into my bruised side. Pain was constant now,
though I was sure I was more dead than alive. I thought about Miller, a man driven by hatred towards another man. Not because of my killing of his son, or at least not only that. Something else was driving him. Could it be that he had to blame someone else for his son's own flaws? Perhaps he couldn't admit that he failed as a father himself. Maybe he had to convince himself that what Billy did was done because I provoked it. Yet the more I thought about it, the more none of this made sense. I don't know if it was the fatigue from the last few days or just the crazed wonderings of failing brain, but I finally found myself thinking about my situation at angles I had not considered till now. By mid-afternoon, my horse and I needed water badly. The Tanajas we drank from before was too far and possibly guarded. I had given the horse small sips from my canteen and went thirsty myself till there wasn't enough water left for a gnat. It crossed my mind that this just might be it. Cates, I thought to myself, you, sir, are in one more fix. The Tanajas is off limits. The spring at Dry Gulch is 40 miles east, and you're right in the middle of a skillet. After all the miles running like a chicken, it only seems fitting for you to end up with the same fate as an egg. It was only then something buzzed past my ear. Or was it? Was I going loco? There was another, a small sound. I squinted my eyes, forcing them to focus. My heart leaped. Bees. Bees are never far from water. Taking a good bead on the direction they were flying and finding me a landmark ahead to navigate by, we rode. After about an hour of riding and stopping from time to time, hoping to see another bee, I spotted a rocky depression in the distance, directly in line with the direction the bees were headed. I was on top of it before I knew it. A small trickle of water pooled in shadow. I guided the horse gently, careful not to make noise, keeping my head low, scanning for scouts. Every movement hurt. My ribs throbbed. Fire and ice mixing in a way that made each breath sharp. But I had no choice. The water was bitter, full of grit, but it was life. I drank slow, tasting the desert, and washed my wound again. Blood had seeped through the cloth, drying in streaks across my skin. Removing the bandage, I soaked it and washed the rags in water from the spring. Survival was as much stubbornness as skill at this point, and stubbornness was all I had left. That night, I rode in the gray hour, shadows stretching long and thin across the sand. I found a shallow cleft, barely more than a notch in the rim, and dropped the horse inside. My limbs screamed, my side burned, but I tied the horse and loosened the cinch. I left the saddle on for fear that I'd never have the strength to get it back up when the time came. The air was heavy with the smell of sage and dust. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift for a moment. I saw Chavez standing on the rim, bow in hand, the quiet patience of the Apache in his eyes. I remembered the lessons he had drilled into me. Read the land, respect the wind, let the rocks speak, let the water heal you, and always know your enemy. Those lessons weren't just survival, they were strategy. And right now, strategy was the only thing between me and Miller's relentless chase. Before dawn, I was moving again, cutting along the edges of a series of ridges. I doubled back, laying a false trail through a dry wash that twisted in loops, hoping to throw the scouts off. Suddenly, my eyes were full of rock dust, and I heard the sharp rap of a bullet. I could hear faint shouts in the distance, rifle shots echoing like the toll of some iron bell. Each bullet thumped into the dirt nearby, rattling the ground beneath me. The pain flared bright in my ribs,
but I forced the horse forward. There was no other choice. A sudden flinch from my horse made me grab at the saddle horn. A scout had come up on my left, trying to head me off. My Colt was in my hand without thinking. The man froze as my shots buzzed past him, and I kicked the horse hard, spurring him into a tangle of rocks. Dust flew, hoofbeats pounded, and I felt every ache in my muscles and every burn in my side. My energy was slipping. My breath came in sharp bursts, sweat and blood mixing on my face. I could barely keep the horse's pace steady, let alone think 2 moves ahead of Miller. I leaned into my saddle for a moment, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Keep going. Just keep going." The desert seemed to press in on me, each rock a wall, each canyon a trap. And then I saw a faint swirl of dust beyond the rim, a movement that wasn't natural. My chest tightened. Could it be Miller's men? A scout waiting for me to get in range? I spurred the tired horse on, forcing him into the rocky ridge where the shadows might hide us. Pain flared hot, fire that made me gasp, but I pressed on. Night fell blissfully and suddenly, and yet again I somehow found a hidden basin with water and shade, a tiny miracle tucked under a ridge. My horse drank eagerly, nostrils flaring, ears twitching at every sound. I washed and bathed my wound again, felt the fever pressing against my temples. I allowed myself to lean back against the rock, closing my eyes for a few minutes, and thought about what lay ahead. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, the people waited. My brothers and sisters of the desert. The Apache who had raised me when I was nothing but a boy left for dead. And I knew that if Miller tried to press too close, they would answer the call. But until then, I had only the land, my horse, my Colt, and the stubborn will to survive. Blood, sand, and sweat. They were my companions now. And as long as I breathed, I'd keep riding. Chapter 7. The desert has a way of whispering secrets if you listen. I'd learned that over the years, the way the wind bends the grasses, the way shadows fall across ridges, the faint shimmer of water in hidden basins. That morning, as I crested a low ridge, I felt it. A presence in the rock and brush. Something that didn't belong to the wind, to the sun, to the horses and crows. I eased the bay forward, every muscle screaming, every breath a sharp stab in my side. The fever from the wound had settled into a dull thrum in my skull, making the world shimmer along the edges. I moved slow, careful, and that's when I saw them. Figures on the high rim, moving like shadows that weren't entirely shadows. No sound came from them, no clatter of boots, no telltale flash of steel, only the subtle shift of shapes against the rock. The Apache. My people. Flaco Chavez led them, tall, broad-shouldered, bow in hand, eyes like dark water scanning the land below. I felt a pulse of hope I hadn't dared to feel since leaving Bitter Creek. But there was no time to waste. Miller's posse had pressed close overnight. I could hear the faint murmur of movement along the ridge below, rifles scraping stone. Every step sent pain lancing through my ribs, and my side burned with each breath. I pressed the horse forward, letting the shadows swallow us, and whispered to him, "Steady, boy. Don't falter now. We've almost made it.
Don't give up on me now. I ducked behind a boulder at the base of the wash, heart hammering. The Apache above me moved without sound, flattening against the rimrock, eyes trained like hawks. Their presence wasn't just reassurance. It was now part of the strategy. I remembered the lessons Flacco had taught me as a boy. You are never alone if you know the land and the people who read it. Miller's men came first, unaware of the rim above them. One stumbled into the shallow wash where I had left faint tracks, thinking I was still moving east. I stayed flat against the rock, letting the shadows hide me. The horse huffed beneath me, nostrils flaring, ears flicking, sensing danger even better than I did. The first rifle crack came, emptying a saddle of one of the posse members. The man was dead before he hit the ground. Dust and small stones kicked up, startling the rest, and I felt the rhythm of the fight start to shift. Apache arrows and carefully placed shots made the men scatter, confusion spreading faster than bullets. Miller's voice carried faintly, sharp and commanding, as he tried to rally the posse. But the desert had its own order now. The land and my people moved in ways he had not accounted for. I gritted my teeth, pushing the horse into a narrow wash where the rocks carved a hidden path. Pain seared along my ribs, and every step made the old grays flare bright. The fever had made my head throb, and sweat ran into my eyes, stinging like salt on a fresh wound. But I pressed on. Each thump of pain reminded me that I was still alive, still moving, still thinking. Flacco appeared on a ledge above, nodding once, subtle, and I understood. I was to follow the hidden basin along the east ridge. From there, a dry wash would take me deeper into the maze of stone, where the posse could not follow easily. I spurred the horse forward, moving as low as I could, every movement a careful negotiation with pain. I could sense that the brave old horse of mine was having to go on the same determination as I was. We were both all in. The posse's shouts echoed faintly from below, frustration and anger cracking through the desert heat. I felt Miller's presence in their strategy. In my mind, I saw it in the way they hesitated, how the men split and merged as if trying to predict my movements. They did not yet know the land as I did not yet have the ghosts of the desert moving with me. By midday, I had gained some ground. Sweat ran along my face, staining the dust into a mask of grime. My side burned and throbbed, every step a drumbeat in my chest. But horse and I continued steady on, driven by the lack of any other option. Just move had become our only goal together. The Apache above moved like silent sentinels, corralling the men, scattering them without leaving themselves exposed. I caught glimpses of the bronze skin, the braided hair, the bowstring taut and ready. The people of the desert were watching over me, my people. I felt a surge of something close to relief. I pressed against the horse's neck as we moved through the dry wash, whispering low, "We will make it, boy. Just a little longer." My limbs screamed, my side burned like fire and ice, but the land, the shadows, and the ghosts above carried me forward. By sunset, the posse was scattered and confused, forced to retreat to more open ground. The desert swallowed their cries, their curses, and I finally dared to breathe. I found a narrow cleft beneath a ridge, dismounted, and let my body slump against the horse. Pain radiated along my ribs, fever pressing on my head, but I was alive. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment to rest, to close my eyes, and feel the desert around me. Above, Flaco Chavez and his warriors watched silently, guardians of the land and of me. They had turned the chase unseen and unstoppable, and I knew, with the help of the people, Miller would have to rethink every step. The law of the town was powerless here. The law of the desert and the people who commanded it was absolute. And for the first time since Bitter Creek, I allowed a small smile, even as pain lanced through my side. I was not yet free, but I was no longer alone. Chapter 8. The sun was low, burning gold across the ridges, and the desert shadows stretched long and thin. I guided my horse into the narrow wash I knew would conceal us. The Apache had spread out above the ridges, their eyes like hawks watching every move below. I felt their presence, silent, patient, a shadow over Miller and his men. I knew they couldn't see. Miller had split his posse again, trying to corral me into open ground. The kind of move that would have worked if I hadn't seen so much of it recently. We were now in my home. I had spent 9 years among the Apache, learning to read this land, to understand wind and shadow, to disappear into the stones themselves. And I had a horse that knew the rhythm of my body, every stumble, every shift. The first sign of their attempted trap was subtle, a faint set of tracks that didn't belong to me, cut across the dry wash, leading into a narrowing gap. My gut tightened. Miller was testing, probing, trying to pin me against a wall of rock where the posse could line up and cut me down. I could almost hear the snap of his mind, the way he measured distances, the way he imagined I would move. Miller was unhinged, driven by something irrational. Yet I was beginning to understand him. I slowed the horse, keeping my hand against my side. The pain was becoming an old friend by now, a constant reminder that I was still in the fight. The fever was pressing, a dull thrum behind my eyes, but I gritted my teeth. I ain't cashing in yet. Not here. I led the bay into the narrowing canyon, keeping low. Dust and rock hit our trail. Every step brought another spike of pain, but I forced myself to move, focusing on the anger that now pushed me on. The need to win. I had been chased and forced to run like a wounded deer all across this desert, almost killing a good horse. Shot at, wounded, racked with fever, and still they kept coming. Thanks to Flaco, I had now been given the opportunity to go to my corner, regroup, and get ready for another round. This time, the fight was on equal terms. Let's see if they had the courage to pick on a force their own size. A rifle boomed, and a bullet struck the far wall of rock, throwing up a shower of stones. The horse jumped, and I fought to keep the animal under control, sweat instantly beating up on my forehead from pain and anger. Another shot, closer this time, thumped into the sand beside us, and I felt the vibrations up my arm and ribs. Close enough to feel the hate surge within me like the fires of hell. Above, a dozen arrows hissed through the air, striking rocks and sand near the posse. The Apache had begun their work. Flaco's voice carried faintly in my memory. Patience. Wait for the moment. Miller's men scrambled, shouting and firing blindly, trying to find me. The canyon amplified every noise, every shouted order, every curse. Dragging myself back into the saddle, I let the horse follow the narrow path, slipping deeper into the hidden washes, turning, doubling back, laying false trails. Each misstep they made was another heartbeat of advantage for me. The pain was there, but somehow distant. I was planning, and I was on the defense. Maybe I'd die. Maybe I'd collapse. But for now, I was ready to fight that whole damn posse, and mad enough to skin Miller a strip at a time. I could taste the anger, metallic and strong. And then I saw Miller himself, standing on a high rock, rifle raised, eyes scanning like a hawk. His face was stone, unreadable, but I could see the calculation in his stance. The moment was tight, the kind of moment where time stops. That dimension where a man could be measured, weighed, and broken in an instant. Nothing else mattered. I felt no pain. My exhaustion drained away. Suddenly, I felt steady, strong, and sure. I could see the insanity in the man before me, his own desire to kill me, and I no longer felt sorry for him. All of this was of his own making. All of this could have been avoided if he'd been a father instead of a man determined to raise a killer. He had spent 20 years creating the chase that had taken us both to this point. The desert is unforgiving. It does not forgive weakness, and this man was weak. I lifted the Colt and allowed instinct to guide me. Suddenly, without warning, the Apache above shifted. A small landslide of stones broke loose above the posse, and men scattered, scrambling for cover. Dust and debris blinded them. In the chaos, I was forced to press the horse into a hidden arroyo. A bullet grazed my saddle horn, but I didn't even flinch. The sun was blazing the western rim. The posse was disoriented, scattered, and vulnerable. I pressed through the final notch of rock, leading the horse into a concealed basin where the Apache had arranged their position. Flacco stepped into view, bow in hand, a dozen warriors behind him, silent and deadly. The posse froze. Miller's eyes widened as he realized the depth of the trap he had walked into. "This man is ours," Flacco said, voice carrying across the basin. "You come for him. You come for the desert itself." Miller's jaw tightened, the color draining from his face. He knew in that moment that the game was over. The law of Bitter Creek, the badge, the threat, it meant nothing here. He was standing against a force he couldn't understand, couldn't control, and the land itself had betrayed him. I dismounted with a smile, fresh blood soaking through my shirt. I was alive. I may be dead tomorrow, but I am alive today. The hunter had become the hunted. Trapper had become the trapped. Trapped by a desert he thought he could command. Miller lowered his rifle slowly. Hatred and disbelief etched into every line of his face. His posse followed, beaten, humiliated, trapped by a ghost of the desert and the people who commanded it. And I knew, as Flacco and his warriors closed in, that the trail that had begun in Bitter Creek had finally ended. For now. Chapter 9. The first hint of dawn touched Bitter Creek like a slow hand over old wounds. I hadn't set foot in the town since that day in the Blue Wing Saloon, the day I had drawn against Billy Miller. And now, with the Apache at my back, the desert wind carrying us forward, I rode in knowing it was time to finish what had begun. The streets were empty, the town still waking. The saloon doors hung on their hinges, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Memories of the boy, the sheriff's son, flashed sharp in my mind. Regret had no place in survival, but it lingered anyway. I dismounted in obvious discomfort, but was focused in spite of it. and ready for anything. Miller was waiting. He had gathered the remains of his posse, men shaken and ragged from the chase, their eyes wary as the Apache warriors emerged from the surrounding ridges, silent and deadly. The people of Bitter Creek peered from windows and doors, whispers traveling like sparks across dry grass. Miller had been cock of the walk around here, ruling like a king and making orders as if he was. These people didn't put up with Miller out of love. They obeyed out of fear. No one dared to challenge his authority. No one stood against Miller. No one, that is, until now. He stepped forward, badge glinting in the weak sunlight, face stone hard, eyes narrowing on me. "Cates Remington," he said, voice low, calculated. "You made it far enough, but this town is mine. You came into my town, and you killed my son." I shifted slightly, feeling every ache in my body, every pulse of fever, and let my eyes meet his. "No, Miller, you killed your son. You refused to teach him as a father. You refused to show him discipline and compassion. You allowed him to be prideful, and you encouraged him to make a big name for himself. He died following exactly what you taught him to be. Can't you see, Miller? Your boy died for nothing other than trying to make you happy. He died trying to gain your approval because you were too much a coward yourself to raise a man. As for this town, it was never yours, Miller. You just made it yours by fear, and fear doesn't hold against the land or the people who know it." The Apache moved to the flanks, silent shadows framing the town's entrance. Miller's men shifted nervously, realizing the trap wasn't just a canyon or a ridge this time. It was the town itself, watched by forces they couldn't face. I saw it then, the first crack in Miller's armor of menace. His eyes flicked to the townsfolk peeking from windows, to the quiet strength of Flacco and his warriors. A faint hesitation, almost imperceptible, but enough. That's all it takes. One moment of doubt, one glance at the truth. "You're outnumbered," I said, voice steady despite the throb of pain. "Outsmarted, outridden, and you know it, Dingus." He sneered, but the sneer faltered, the practiced cruelty cracking. His voice trailed. Stories had begun whispering through Bitter Creek over the last week. Rumors of Miller's unknown past, started by a traveling gambler who had known Miller but under a different name. A past of a Kansas outlaw known as Dingus Galloway. The rumors had begun to catch up. I saw the shift in his posture, the tension leaving his shoulders, replaced by the inevitability of exposure. Flacco stepped forward, bow lowered but ready, and spoke in words Miller didn't understand, but felt the meaning of. "The desert protects its own. You've hunted a ghost, but ghosts do not fear death. And you," his gaze flicked to Miller, "are not what you claim to be." Miller's jaw tightened. The truth had a way of breaking men faster than bullets. His secret history, the hidden crimes, his true identity as Dingus Galloway, everything that had made him untouchable until now, was unraveling. Although I was in a pitiful shape and looked more dead than alive, I was solid and ready. not allowing myself the luxury of being tired. I stood like a wall. "I'm no killer," I said, low. "I survived. You chose vengeance over justice, and it's cost you everything." The townsfolk stepped cautiously into the street, whispers growing louder, carrying the weight of what they now understood. Miller's posse lowered their heads, some muttering, others turning away. And Miller had no words left, only the slow acknowledgement that the law he wielded like a hammer had finally been broken over his own head. Hate filled his eyes an instant before he made his last desperate move. His hand clawed for his gun, and I instantly reacted. When the smoke cleared, the dead body of Miller lay face up in the street, the shaft of an arrow protruding out of his forehead, and a .44 size hole in the star on his chest. The Apache moved back into the ridges, silent again, leaving me in the street with the morning wind on my face. The townsfolk watched, hesitant, unsure what to do next. I looked down at the blood on my hands, at the ache in my side, and felt the first real taste of relief. Bitter Creek had witnessed the reckoning, and in that quiet, I knew the murder charge, the manhunt, and the shadow of vengeance were ending. Miller's past had caught up to him. His name, his deeds, had followed him to his death. Not by mercy, not by law, but by truth and the desert's justice. I mounted again, feeling every muscle protest, every pulse of pain a reminder of what it had cost. But I rode out slowly, knowing the Apache watched from the ridges, their presence a silent promise. Freedom had a price, and I had paid it with blood, grit, and endurance. I had passed the test. The town receded behind me, dust curling in the morning light. I didn't ride for vengeance, nor for glory. I rode for the next sunrise, for the wind at my back, for the people who had raised me, and for the trail that never ends.